My name is Stephanie Resnick, and today I will be presenting a critique on the article Effect of an Inclusive Physical Activity Program on Motor, Social Skills, and Attitudes of Students with and Without Autism Spectrum Disorder. Autism spectrum disorder is a neurodevelopmental condition characterized by social communication difficulties and restricted and repetitive patterns. Motor impairment is not in the diagnostic criteria of autism spectrum disorder, although 79 to 83% of individuals with autism spectrum disorder exhibit some type of motor delay. Few studies have examined social skills, motor skills, and peer attitudes together in students with autism participating in an inclusive physical activity program. Studies looking at the effect of an inclusive physical activity program on social skills and motor skills separately have shown promising results. There is limited research on the effect of an inclusive physical activity program on peer attitudes towards those with autism spectrum disorder. The purpose of the study by Samsey et al. Was to evaluate the effectiveness of an inclusive physical activity program on motor skills, social skills, and attitudes of students with and without autism spectrum disorder. Children between the ages of 6 to 11 years old in 3rd and 4th grade of typically developing were chosen from 3 primary schools located in Batman, Turkey. Students with autism spectrum disorder first completed an adaptation stage that consisted of getting to know the physical education teachers and facilities before typically developing peers were brought in. Typically developing students were given a class on disability and autism spectrum disorder to learn more about the condition. Students participated in the inclusive physical activity program 2 days a week for 12 weeks. There are a variety of different instruments used as measurement tools in this study. The first was the test of Gross Motor Development 3, which assesses motor skills of locomotion and ball skills. Additionally, the Friendship Activity Scale was used to measure perception of the typically developing peers towards those with autism spectrum disorder. The objective checklist was used to assess attitudes of the typically developing peers towards the students with autism spectrum disorder. The social skills rating system parent form was used as a measurement of social skills and problematic behavior of students with autism spectrum disorder. In addition, semi-structured interviews were conducted with parents, special education teachers, physical education teachers, and typically developing peers to gather more data. In total, 49 students participated in this protocol. This included 25 students with autism spectrum disorder, including 21 males and 4 females, and 24 typically developing students, including 13 males and 11 females. The treatment receiving group consisted of 14 students with autism spectrum disorder, including 12 males and 2 females, and 14 typically developing students, including 7 males and 7 females. The control group consisted of 11 ASD students with 8 males and 1 female, and 10 typically developing students with 5 males and 5 females. You can see that there is a disparity in the amount of males with autism spectrum disorder as there's females, as this is due to the prevalence of autism, as autism is more common in males than it is females based on the diagnostic criteria currently. And you can also see that there is more students in the treatment receiving group than the control group, and this was to account for any students that may need to withdraw from the protocol for any reason. Looking at the results, pre-intervention, students with autism spectrum disorder in the treatment receiving group and control group had no statistical differences, and after the intervention, students with autism spectrum disorder in the control group had no differences compared to pre-intervention. Looking at the autism spectrum disorder students in the treatment receiving group, we can notice some statistical differences. And first, in overall locomotor, there's a statistical difference. And in the subcategories of run, gallop, and skip. Looking at the ball skills, you can see that overall, there's a statistical difference after the intervention and in the categories of two-hand strike and kick. Looking at the typically developing peers pre and post intervention, pre-intervention, the typically developing peers in both the treatment receiving group and control group had no statistical difference. And after the intervention, those in the control group also still had no statistical difference. Looking at those in the treatment receiving group, you can see that overall locomotive motor, there was a difference, and in the subcategories of run, gallop, skip, and slide. Now going over to those ball skills, overall, again, there is no difference pre-intervention between the two groups, the control group and the treatment receiving group, and there is no difference in the control group after the intervention. Looking at the treatment receiving group, we can see some differences. In overall ball skills, there is a difference, and also in the subcategories of two-hand strike, one-hand strike, dribble, catch, kick, overhand throw, and underhand throw. Looking at the peer attitudes and perceptions of the typically developing peers compared to towards the autism spectrum disorder students, there is no statistical difference pre or post intervention using either the friendship activity scale or the objective checklist. Now looking at the results from the interview, these results were reported qualitatively, and they include the inclusive physical activity program increased interest of the students with autism spectrum disorder towards physical activity as reported by their parents. Typically developing students had a decrease in fatigue throughout the 12-week period reported by them. And the typically developing students also reported that pre-intervention, they were afraid of the students with autism spectrum disorder and they experienced shyness, but those in the treatment receiving group said after learning about these individuals and being in classes with them, they no longer were afraid of them or had shyness towards them. And there's also positive changes in social skills of the autism spectrum disorder students in the treatment receiving group, as noted by their parents and teachers. In conclusion, an inclusive physical activity program improves motor skills in both autism spectrum disorder and typically developing students, and improves the interest of autism spectrum disorder students in physical activity and the perception of typically developing students of those with autism spectrum disorder. Future studies should look at how an inclusive physical activity program affects daily physical activity, academic success, and physical fitness. Moving on to the critiques. The first critique is that all students in the study were from the same geographical region. Different regions have different amount of resources in schools for students with autism spectrum disorder, and these results may look different in an area with less resources for students with disabilities, including autism spectrum disorder. Next, objective measures have not been used to look at the program's effect on social skills of students with autism spectrum disorder, as these were reported by parents and teachers. Other studies have utilized instruments such as the social interaction checklist and aberrant behavior checklist to look at these social skills in autism spectrum disorder, so that may be something to be considered. Additionally, a large portion of the results were self-reported by students, teachers, and parents. Self-reported results can be influenced by a variety of factors, including emotions and social bias, to name two. Additional short and long-term follow-up should be warranted to establish the longevity of the results of the intervention. The post results were taken right after the intervention, so it may be beneficial to add a follow-up result to see if the results of the intervention were long-lived. I would like to thank my mentor, Dr. Kim, and the Syracuse University Department of Exercise Science at Falk College. And I'd like to thank IOHSK for having me. Thank you so much.